I remember the exact moment I realized she hadn't kissed me hello in weeks. It hit me like a cold wave, right as I watched her quickly flip her phone screen down, away from me. That small gesture, the phone disappearing from my view, suddenly felt like a punch to the gut, connecting to an ache I hadn't even consciously registered yet. We used to have this ritual, this simple, comforting exchange. After work, no matter how tired or stressed, she'd come up to me, or I'd go to her, and there'd be a kiss. A real one, not a peck, but a moment that said, "I'm home, I missed you." Our life together was built on these small, reliable connections. Sarah and I had been married for 12 years. We met in college, navigated challenging careers, supported each other through family losses, and built a comfortable, quiet home. We were the couple people looked at and thought, they've got it figured out. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared silences that felt more intimate than words. We weren't flashy, but we were solid. I trusted her implicitly, and I believed she trusted me. But in the last few months, that solid feeling had started to crumble around the edges. It wasn't a dramatic collapse, just tiny, almost imperceptible shifts. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Sarah, who always had a story about her day or a question for me, started retreating into herself. She'd get home, say a quick hey, and then disappear into her phone. It wasn't just browsing social media. It felt different, more intense. Her phone, which used to be just another device, slowly became an extension of her, always within reach, always face down. Before, it would just lie there, screen up, often unlocked, a casual object in our shared space. Now, if she put it down, the screen was invariably hidden from view. My first thought was maybe she was just being careful with her privacy, but the habit felt too deliberate, too consistent. I tried to brush it off. We all get caught up in our phones, right? Work emails, family chats, online shopping. I told myself it was normal. But then came the new passwords. Not on our shared accounts, but on her personal devices. Her tablet, her laptop, even the desktop we sometimes shared. Suddenly, they all had new login screens. When I casually asked about it, she just mumbled something about security updates, or too many random apps. It sounded reasonable enough, but it was still a change, a new barrier. The shift in our physical intimacy was harder to ignore. The kisses had faded, yes, but so had the casual touches, the lingering hugs, the simple warmth of her beside me on the couch. Our sex life hadn't vanished completely, but it had become scheduled, less spontaneous, less passionate. It felt like checking a box rather than a genuine expression of desire. When I tried to initiate, sometimes she'd be too tired, or not feeling it. And when we did, it felt like she was somewhere else entirely. I started feeling like I was walking on eggshells, trying to figure out what was going on without actually asking. I didn't want to accuse her of anything, because what exactly was I accusing her of? Being busy? Needing more privacy? Being tired? It sounded ridiculous even in my own head. Maybe I was just being needy, or insecure. Maybe she was going through something at work she didn't want to burden me with. I kept searching for logical explanations, because the alternative was too painful to consider. Her schedule also became a bit more erratic. Not massively, just little things. Sometimes she'd stay late at work, saying there was a big project. Other times, she'd be out with friends, and her texts back would be delayed, or short. It was never anything extreme enough to raise immediate red flags. Just enough to create a low hum of unease in the background of my life. One evening, I came home to find her just back from the gym. She usually showered before she left for work, or sometimes we'd shower together in the evenings. But lately, these post-workout showers had become a new ritual. She'd come in, put her gym bag down, immediately grab her phone, and head straight for the bathroom. The door would close, and the water would start running almost instantly. It was as if she needed to wash something off, quickly, before interacting with me. It was a pattern I started to notice. Another night, we were watching TV. I reached for her hand, and she instinctively pulled it away, almost imperceptibly, to type something on her phone. She looked up, gave me a quick, apologetic smile, and then her eyes were back on the screen, her thumbs flying. I tried to see what she was doing, but her body was angled just enough, her hand covering the display, so I couldn't get a clear view. It wasn't just face down anymore, it was actively shielded. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't about the phone itself, it was what the phone represented. It was the gatekeeper to her attention, her secrets, and now, it felt like, her very self. The woman I married, the one I knew so well, seemed to be slowly slipping away, replaced by someone whose world was increasingly contained within the glowing rectangle she guarded so fiercely. I lay there in the quiet of the living room, listening to the muffled sounds of the show and the quiet tap-tap of her fingers. The silence between us felt heavier than ever, filled with unspoken questions and a growing, suffocating dread. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew, with an awful certainty, that something fundamental had changed, and I was on the outside looking in. The lingering dread from that night only deepened as the weeks blurred into months. Sarah's phone remained her constant companion, a silent barrier between us. Every time she set it down, it was face down. Every time I walked into a room, her thumb instinctively shielded the screen or she tucked it away. It wasn't a conscious act, not like she was trying to be obvious, but more like a reflex, a habit ingrained through constant practice. It was like living with a ghost, a physical presence whose mind and heart were increasingly somewhere else. The short answers became shorter still, clipped and devoid of any real detail. "How was your day?" I'd ask, trying to bridge the gap. "Fine," she'd reply, often without looking up from her screen or whatever she was doing. No stories from work, no amusing anecdotes, no shared frustrations. The texture of our daily lives, once woven together through these small exchanges, was fraying, thread by painful thread. It felt like I was talking to a wall that occasionally grunted in response. Then came the late nights. It started subtly, an extra hour here or there, a delayed text saying she was still at the gym, or caught up with a friend. I tried to be understanding. Work gets busy, friends need support, but the frequency increased. 2 nights a week became 3, sometimes 4. She'd arrive home, often after I'd already eaten dinner alone, or even after I'd gone to bed. When she did come in, there was a new routine. Straight to the shower, sometimes for a remarkably long time. The sound of the water running seemed to wash away more than just the day's grime. It felt like it was washing away any chance of a late-night conversation, any opportunity for connection. I remember one Tuesday she called around 7:30 p.m., saying she was meeting a colleague for a quick dinner to discuss a project. I nodded, told her to have a good time, and ate my takeout pad thai alone. Around 10 p.m. I sent a text, "Heading to bed, hope dinner went well." No reply. At 11:30 p.m., I woke up to the sound of her key in the lock. She came in, went straight to the bathroom, and the shower started. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, she just said, "Long night," and got into bed, turning her back to me. No kiss, no apology for being so late, no explanation about the quick dinner, just a wall of silence and an icy distance that felt physically palpable. The quick showers became a new signal. After the gym, after work, after seeing friends, almost every time she came home from being out, the first thing she did was shower. It was more than just good hygiene, it was a ritual. And sometimes, I'd notice her phone would go with her, or she'd emerge from the bathroom having visibly changed her clothes again, even if she'd only been home for 5 minutes. It struck me as odd, like she was resetting, erasing something before she rejoined the domestic space. I started to pay closer attention, not because I wanted to find fault, but because the unease in my gut was becoming impossible to ignore. I noticed small things. Her car sometimes had a faint, unfamiliar scent. Not her perfume, not anything I recognized. Once, I saw a new coffee cup in her cup holder, a brand from a cafe, a good 20 minutes out of her usual route to work or the gym. I asked her about it, casually. "New coffee place?" She just shrugged. "Oh, just tried somewhere different today." Her tone was dismissive, almost annoyed that I'd even noticed. Then there were the financial oddities. Nothing huge, no massive withdrawals or new car payments. But one month, a small charge appeared on our joint credit card statement. Men's apparel minus $45. I stared at it, confused. It wasn't my size, and I hadn't bought anything for myself. When I asked her, she said, "Oh, that must have been for my brother's birthday." I grabbed him a gift, forgot to tell you. Her brother lived 3 states away, and his birthday wasn't for another 2 months. I let it go, but the explanation felt thin, too quick, too rehearsed. It gnawed at me. The biggest shift was her emotional unavailability. Where we once shared everything, now she seemed to carry secrets like heavyweights. If I tried to initiate a deeper conversation about us, about the distance, she'd shut down immediately. "I'm just tired," she'd say, or "Can we not do this right now? I have a lot on my mind." It was always right now, which inevitably meant never. The intimacy, physical and emotional, continued to dwindle. Casual touches became almost non-existent. Kissing was a rarity, reserved for brief pecks before work or an obligatory goodnight. The passion that had once defined our marriage felt like a distant memory, replaced by a polite, almost roommate-like existence. I started to doubt myself. Was I being clingy, overly sensitive? Maybe she was just stressed with work, or going through some kind of personal crisis I wasn't privy to. I tried to give her space, tried to be supportive, thinking that if I just waited, she would come back to me, come back to *us. But the more space I gave, the wider the chasm became. One evening, I came home a little early from work. Sarah was in the living room, her back to me, on her phone. I heard her voice, low and soft, a tone I hadn't heard her use with me in months. It was light, almost playful. "I know," she whispered, a small giggle escaping her lips. "Me too. Later, okay?" Then she heard my footsteps, and her posture stiffened. She snapped the phone shut, almost literally, closing whatever app she was on and setting it down face down on the coffee table. Her whole body tensed. She turned to me, her face schooling itself into a neutral, almost weary expression. "Hey, you're early," she said, but it wasn't a welcome. It was an accusation. I asked her, as calmly as I could, "Who was that?" She paused, a beat too long. "Just Amanda," she said, referring to a colleague. "We were talking about the quarterly reports." The explanation felt hollow. Amanda was a loud, boisterous woman. Sarah never used that soft, conspiratorial tone with her. And quarterly reports didn't sound like it warranted. "I know, me too, later, okay?" I didn't press it, but the seed of doubt, which had been growing steadily, now sprouted a thorny branch. The guardedness around her phone intensified. She took it to the bathroom every single time. She'd leave the room to take calls. If I was nearby, she'd angle the screen away from me, or simply stop typing until I moved. It was like living with a secret agent, constantly aware of unseen threats, always on guard. I felt like a threat in my own home. One Saturday morning, I woke up earlier than her. I crept out of bed and made coffee. When I came back to the bedroom, she was still asleep, her phone on her bedside table. For the first time in months, it wasn't face down. It was lying on its back, screen up. And there, on the locked screen, a notification was visible. It was just a sliver of text, cut off before the end, from an unsaved number. It read, "Can't stop thinking about our..." The rest was hidden by the clock widget. My heart seized in my chest. Our what? I thought. Our conversation? Our lunch? Our night? Before I could even process it, before I could reach for it, her eyes flickered open. She saw me looking at her phone. Her eyes widened, and a flash of panic crossed her face. She snatched the phone, flipped it over, and sat bolt upright. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp and accusatory. The notification was gone, buried under the lock screen, and the chance to see it vanished. But I had seen enough. The cold dread in my stomach wasn't just dread anymore. It was an icy, undeniable certainty. The flash of panic in Sarah's eyes, the way she snatched her phone like it was a burning ember, confirmed everything I had been dreading. The icy, undeniable certainty was now a cold, heavy weight in my chest. There was no more space for doubt, no more room for excuses about Amanda or stress at work. She was hiding something. And that something was exactly what I didn't want it to be. The quiet that followed her sharp question, "What are you doing?" felt like a physical wall between us. I mumbled something about getting coffee, but she didn't relax. She just stared at me, her face pale, her phone clutched tight in her hand. The moment hung there, thick with unspoken accusations and unconfirmed truths. I left the room, the coffee suddenly tasting like ash. The conversation, or lack thereof, wasn't going to happen. Not yet. I knew I needed more. I couldn't just confront her with a partial text notification. She'd deny it, twist it, and then become even more impenetrable. This wasn't about catching her in a lie anymore. It was about understanding the full scope of the betrayal. My perspective shifted. Every glance, every word, every movement of hers became a clue. It wasn't paranoia, it was focused observation. I started paying closer attention to her work schedule. She'd always been diligent, but now, late nights became less about actual work and more about a vague extension of her day. She'd often text, running late, wrapping things up, but her replies would sometimes slow down for extended periods after that, only to pick up again later, sounding rushed. It didn't add up. If she was wrapping things up, why the silence? And why the sudden rush of texts an hour later, usually just before she finally headed home? One evening, she came home later than usual. She said she'd been at a networking event. Her hair was still damp from what she claimed was a quick shower at the gym, but it looked more like it had air-dried after being thoroughly washed. Her clothes, however, were not the usual gym attire she wore to these things. She was in a simple, dark dress I hadn't seen in ages, one she used to wear for more intimate dinners. It was casual enough for networking, but it felt off. Later, when she was in the shower, I went to throw some laundry in. In the hamper was the dark dress. It smelled faintly of her perfume, but underneath that, there was a completely unfamiliar scent. It was subtle, musky, definitely masculine. Not the strong cologne type, but something warm and earthy. My stomach clenched. I started to notice new, small habits. Sarah had always been particular about her car. Now, it was almost obsessively clean on the inside. No stray coffee cups, no papers, no half-eaten snacks. It was pristine, as if wiped down regularly. But then I'd see a small, unfamiliar item, a pen with a company logo I didn't recognize, or once, a tiny, colorful wrapper from a brand of gum she never chewed, tucked into the side pocket. These were insignificant on their own, but when stacked against everything else, they became heavy. She was erasing traces, but sometimes a trace was left behind. The men's apparel charge from a few weeks ago had been dismissed with a quick, "Oh, it was a work gift for Tom from accounting." But Tom from accounting was a middle-aged man who always wore ill-fitting suits. It didn't sit right. I went back to the joint bank statement, scrolling further back than I normally would. There were a few other charges that caught my eye. A weekend getaway to a B&B about 3 months ago, explained as a, quote, girls' trip with Amanda. But Amanda had a distinct Instagram habit, always posting photos of her trips. There were no photos of Sarah, or any mention of this particular B&B on Amanda's feed. I didn't follow Amanda, but Sarah often showed me her posts. I remembered Amanda posting about a completely different weekend getaway around that time, with her actual friends, not Sarah. The dates didn't align. The B&B charge was for 2 nights. I felt like an investigator in my own life, piecing together a puzzle I desperately wished didn't exist. The emotional toll was immense. I found myself snapping at small things, or becoming withdrawn. Sarah noticed, of course. She'd ask, "Is everything okay?" But her voice was flat, devoid of genuine concern. My answer was always a non-committal, "Yeah, just tired." Because how could I articulate the web of deceit I was slowly unraveling? She never pressed. That, more than anything, confirmed her guilt to me. If she truly cared, if she was innocent, she would press. She would fight for us. But she didn't. She just accepted my short answers and retreated back into her own guarded world. The phone, of course, remained the central piece of the puzzle. It was always with her, always shielded. When she went for her daily shower after the gym, it went with her. When she went to the bathroom, it went with her. It was a digital extension of her secret life. I tried to remember the new password she'd set for her tablet and laptop. I'd never been in the habit of snooping, but the sheer urgency of what I needed to know was overriding all my usual boundaries. I tried common dates, our anniversary, her birthday, my birthday. Nothing. She'd changed them all. One afternoon, Sarah left her phone on the kitchen counter while she briefly went out to the mailbox. This was unusual. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked past it, trying to appear casual. It was locked. But then I remembered a trick I'd seen online. Sometimes, if you wake the screen and then press the emergency call button, it would show you a sliver of the recent contacts or even messages without unlocking the device. It was a long shot, and it might not even work on her specific phone. I picked it up, my hand shaking slightly. I pressed the power button, bringing the screen to life. Then, with a shallow breath, I tapped the emergency call option. Nothing, just the dial pad. My hope deflated, but then I noticed, in the top left corner, next to the signal strength, a tiny envelope icon, and next to it, the number 3. 3 unread messages. It wasn't the full message, but it was something. 3 messages from an unsaved number, I presumed, given the notification I'd seen earlier. This phone was full of secrets. I put it back down, my mind racing. 3 messages. From whom? What did they say? The frustration was immense. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, seeing the bottom, but unable to take the final step. I needed to see those messages. I needed to know what was on that phone. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, something shifted in me. I couldn't sleep. The silence in the house was deafening, amplified by the clamor of my thoughts. I got up and walked into the living room. The lights were off, the streetlights casting long shadows. I sat on the couch, staring into the darkness. I felt utterly alone, completely adrift in my own home. This was not the man I was, nor the life I had envisioned. I felt a desperate need for the truth, no matter how painful. The constant suspicion, the subtle game of cat and mouse was destroying me. I decided then, I wasn't going to wait for another ambiguous clue or a snatched glimpse. I needed to know. The only way to truly understand what was happening was to find definitive proof, and the most likely place for that proof was her phone. I wrestled with the ethics of it for a long time, but the thought of living another day in this suffocating uncertainty pushed me past my moral reservations. I was already being betrayed. My privacy had already been invaded by her secrets. The next evening, Sarah mentioned she had a late meeting. "Probably won't be home until after 10, she said, avoiding my gaze. It was a Tuesday, not a typical late night for her. My heart pounded. This was my chance. I went through the motions of dinner, pretending everything was normal. I helped clean up, watched TV. But my mind was buzzing with a singular purpose. I waited. And waited. The house grew quiet around 9:30 p.m. I went to our bedroom. Sarah's phone was on her nightstand, charging. Just as she always did, she had turned it face down. But for once, that wasn't what mattered. The goal was no longer a partial glimpse. I needed to get into that phone. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling like a thief in my own home. I looked at the dark screen, a black mirror reflecting my own anxious face. I knew her patterns, her habits. She rarely turned off her devices completely. They were just asleep. I picked up the phone. It was heavy in my hand, heavy with secrets. I knew I might only have one chance. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing pulse. I brought the screen to life. It presented the lock screen. I knew what I had to do. I had seen her enter her password before, fleetingly, in the periphery of my vision, when she thought I wasn't looking. I remembered her thumb movements, the sequence, the quick tap-tap swipe of certain numbers. It was a sequence that had stuck with me, an almost unconscious observation that now felt like destiny. I hesitated, then slowly, carefully, I entered the sequence. My fingers trembled slightly. The screen flashed, and then, with a soft click, it unlocked. My breath hitched. It was open. All of it. The apps, the messages, the entire hidden world she had built. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I was in. And suddenly, a cold dread, unlike any I had felt before, washed over me. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was there, but I knew I had to. The silence of the house pressed in, amplifying the weight of the moment. The screen flashed, and then, with a soft click, it unlocked. My breath hitched. It was open. All of it. The apps, the messages, the entire hidden world she had built. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I was in. And suddenly, a cold dread, unlike any I had felt before, washed over me. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was there, but I knew I had to. The silence of the house pressed in, amplifying the weight of the moment. My thumb hovered over the messaging app icon. It felt like an eternity before I finally pressed it. The screen populated with a long list of conversations. Amanda, her sister, a few work groups. I scrolled slowly, my eyes darting, almost afraid of what they would land on. There were the expected daily texts, the mundane details of her life that she shared with everyone else, just not with me anymore. For a fleeting second, I almost convinced myself I had been wrong, that my fears were just products of my own insecurity. Then, I saw it. An unsaved number, exactly the one that had flashed across her lock screen days ago with that chilling, "Can't stop thinking about our" message. My stomach dropped. I tapped on the thread, and the world tilted. It wasn't a long conversation, not like the ones with Amanda or her family, but it didn't need to be. The frequency was enough, stretching back months. The content, however, was the punch to the gut. It wasn't explicit, not a single declaration of love or a graphic detail, but the tone. It was unmistakable. Playful, intimate, full of inside jokes. References to our coffee spot, that terrible movie we saw, and dates that lined up perfectly with her late nights or networking events. There was a picture, a blurry selfie of them both, smiling in what looked like a bar. A bar, not a networking event. And then, the final, crushing blow. A message from him, sent just 2 days ago. Loved our time at the B&B, can't wait for next weekend. My vision blurred. The B&B, Amanda's girls' trip. The one Amanda hadn't posted about. The one where Sarah had been so insistent on going alone. The puzzle pieces didn't just fit. They slammed together, shattering any lingering hope that I had been mistaken. The man in the picture, he was familiar. Not just from Sarah's vague mention of Tom from accounting, but from a company picnic last summer. He was clean-cut, a little quiet, nothing memorable. Now he was everything. He was the reason. The cold dread solidified into an icy certainty. It wasn't just a physical affair, it was an emotional one too. The shared jokes, the secret outings, the stolen moments. It had been happening for months, right under my nose, while I watched her pull away, while I struggled to understand what was wrong with us. My hands trembled, not with anger, but with a profound, desolate grief. The man she was in those messages, that laughing, vibrant woman, was the Sarah I remembered. The one I had married, She just wasn't that Sarah with me anymore. I scrolled back through the messages, a morbid fascination taking hold. There were exchanges about gifts. Got the shirt. Fits perfectly, thank you again. Men's apparel. The charge on our joint card. Tom from accounting. A gift for himself, not a work colleague. The layers of deception, the quiet lies, the calculated omissions, they cascaded over me, each one a fresh wound. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, had systematically dismantled our reality while pretending everything was fine. I put the phone back down on the counter, gently, as if it were fragile, as if it held the last remnants of my sanity. The kitchen light suddenly seemed too bright, the silence too loud. I felt hollowed out, an empty vessel where a husband used to be. There was no rage, no desire to smash things, just an unbearable ache. It was over. Our life, our future, all the plans we had made, extinguished by a few lines of text on a glowing screen. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring blankly, feeling the raw, exposed nerves of my betrayal. Eventually, I heard the garage door open. Sarah was home. My heart gave a weak thump, a final echo of the life that was about to end. I walked into the living room, stood by the window, my back to the door, waiting. I needed a moment to compose myself, to decide how this would happen. There would be no shouting, no dramatics, just the cold, hard truth. She came in, her keys jingling, her purse thudding onto the table. "Hey," she said, her voice bright, almost cheerful. "Long day, I'm starving." She started towards the kitchen, probably heading for the fridge, perhaps to check her phone. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, barely a whisper. She stopped, turning slowly. Her smile faltered as she saw my face. The mask of normalcy she wore so easily started to crack. "What is it?" she asked, her voice losing some of its cheer. She looked wary, like a cat cornered, her eyes darting to my hands, then to the kitchen counter where her phone lay. I turned to face her fully. My eyes met hers, and I saw a flash of fear, then resignation. There was no surprise in her eyes, just the grim acceptance of a truth finally exposed. "I know about Tom," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away, down at her shoes. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to make excuses. The fight, the defiance I had braced myself for, never came. It was as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from her, a burden she had been carrying for months. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, filled with the unspoken words of a decade of shared life now crumbling to dust. "I saw the messages," I continued, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, because emotion would have shattered me. The B&B, the dates, the gifts. She still didn't look up. Her silence was a confession more damning than any words. It confirmed everything. The emotional distance, the guarded phone, the sudden showers, the vague answers. It was all for this. For him. "I need you to leave," I said, the words carefully chosen, delivered without malice, but with an absolute finality. "I can't do this, Sarah, not anymore." She finally raised her head, her eyes clouded. There were no tears, not yet, just a profound sadness, mirrored in my own heart. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. And then, she walked to the kitchen, picked up her phone, and without another word, she started to pack. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet arrangements. She moved into a temporary apartment, aided by Amanda, who avoided my gaze. The house felt huge, empty, echoing with the silence of her absence. A silence far heavier than any of the arguments we never had. The quiet I once craved had become a constant, agonizing reminder of what I had lost. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic shouting match, just the slow, deliberate untangling of two lives that had once been so intertwined. It was a painful, brutal end, not with a bang, but with a series of muffled whispers and a final, heartbreaking whimper. And as I sat in the quiet of our once shared home, I knew that the day she stopped kissing me had been the day my life began to fall apart, one hidden message at a time.